During family game night, my fiancée's dad asked why she was settling for me. She smiled and said, because no one else would marry him. I just put down my cards. A month later, they were asking if I'd talk to her again. The game was Monopoly, which was ironic considering I was about to lose everything I thought I was building. We were at my fiancée Jenna's parents' house for their weekly family game night. It was a mandatory event, a cornerstone of their perfect family image. I was sitting between Jenna and her father, Robert, a man who wore his disappointment in me like a well-tailored suit. Jenna's best friend, Madison, was there too, practically a family member. She and Jenna were giggling about something on their phones, while Robert was counting his fake money with the seriousness of a Wall Street banker. He landed on my property, Boardwalk, with a hotel on it. I told him he owed me $2,000. He sighed dramatically, peeling off the colorful bills. Then he looked across the board at his daughter, my fiancée. "Jenna, I just don't get it," he said, loud enough for the whole room to hear. "Look at this guy. He's a decent earner, I'll give him that. But he has no style, no pedigree. Why are you settling for him?" The air in the room went still. It wasn't the first time he'd made a comment like this, but it was by far the most direct. I felt a familiar tightening in my gut, the one I'd learned to ignore. I looked at Jenna, expecting her to defend me, to shut her father down. Instead, a slow, coy smile spread across her face. She reached over and patted my hand, looking right at her dad. "Because no one else would marry him," she said, her voice dripping with faux sweetness. "Someone has to take care of him." Madison burst out laughing, a shrill, ugly sound. Jenna's mother gave a little titter of amusement. And Robert just smirked, a satisfied, "I told you so" look on his face. They all saw it as a joke. A funny little jab at the quiet, unassuming guy they had all grown to tolerate. I didn't say a word. I looked down at the cards in my hand, at the little plastic hotel on Boardwalk. I felt no anger, no sadness. It was the kind of clarity you get when a complex equation finally solves itself. For 3 years I had been running a cost-benefit analysis on this relationship, and her words were the final, definitive data point. The investment had soured. The risk now far outweighed the potential reward. I calmly placed my cards face down on the board. "I think I'm done playing for tonight," I said, my voice even. I stood up, walked into the kitchen, and got a glass of water. Through the doorway I could hear them resuming their game, my absence barely registering. They thought I was pouting. They had no idea I was liquidating my assets. Let me explain. I'm not a simp, I'm a private equity investor. My entire career is built on a single skill: identifying undervalued or mismanaged assets, acquiring a controlling interest, optimizing their operations, and then selling them for a massive profit. I analyze systems, I find weaknesses, and I execute long-term strategies. 3 years ago, I applied that same skill set to my personal life. I met Jenna at a charity gala. She was beautiful, charming, and came from a family with a legacy business, a regional manufacturing company called Sterling Industries. Her father, Robert, had inherited it from his father, and it was the source of all their wealth and social standing. After a few dates, she invited me to her parents' house for dinner. Robert spent the entire evening talking about his company. But the more he talked, the more I realized he was a terrible businessman. He was coasting on his father's reputation, making sentimental decisions instead of smart ones, and was completely blind to the changing market. I did a deep dive. I spent a week of my own time analyzing Sterling Industries from the outside. The company was an absolute diamond in the rough. It had a solid product line and a loyal customer base, but it was being horribly mismanaged. Outdated technology, inefficient supply chains, a bloated management structure. It was bleeding money, but its core assets were incredibly valuable. With the right leadership, it could be turned around and sold to a national competitor for a fortune. So I formulated a 5-year plan. Step 1, acquire the key asset, which was Jenna. Step 2, integrate into the family structure. Step 3, gain Robert's trust and a seat on the company's board. Step 4, execute a complete operational overhaul. Step 5, facilitate a strategic acquisition by a larger firm, making myself and the family incredibly wealthy and securing my future. Jenna was the entry point. The relationship was my cost of acquisition. I knew from the beginning that she and her family were shallow and materialistic. I tolerated the constant, subtle digs about my background because I grew up in a working-class family. I tolerated Robert's condescending attitude. I tolerated Madison's snarky comments and her role as Jenna's enabling, parasitic sidekick. I paid for the lavish dinners, the surprise designer gifts, the weekend getaways. I played the part of the devoted, slightly out-of-his-league fiancé. It was all a calculated business expense, an investment in a much larger prize. But her comment during that game night changed the entire equation. It was a public declaration that she saw me not as a partner, but as a charity case. It revealed that she had no respect for me, which meant I would never gain the influence needed to execute my plan. The core asset was flawed. The deal was dead. And when a deal goes bad, you don't just walk away. You mitigate your losses and, if necessary, you initiate a hostile takeover of the competition. They saw me as a pawn in their game. They were about to find out I was the one who owned the entire board. Update 1. The week after the game night was a study in strategic silence. I didn't mention the incident. I was perfectly pleasant, but I was distant. I created a space between us, a professional buffer. When Jenna asked what was wrong, I just told her I was preoccupied with a complex new deal at work. This was, of course, true. The deal was the complete and total dismantling of her family's world. They interpreted my quietness as weakness. I overheard Jenna on the phone with Madison, saying I was in one of my moods and that she'd have to cheer me up with a shopping trip. They thought I was a simple machine that could be placated with shiny objects. This arrogance was their greatest vulnerability, and I was going to exploit it to its fullest extent. My first move was to secure my own position. Jenna and I lived in a condo that I owned outright. She had moved in 2 years ago. I spent a Saturday while she was out with Madison creating a complete photographic and itemized inventory of every single possession in that condo. I documented what was mine, what was hers, and what was jointly acquired. Then I met with a lawyer, a man who specialized in high-conflict divorces and corporate litigation. He reviewed my documentation and the prenuptial agreement I had insisted on, which Jenna had laughed at but signed. The prenup was ironclad. It protected all my pre-existing assets, including my condo and my investment portfolio. Our engagement was, legally speaking, a very clean break. Next, I turned my attention to Sterling Industries. For the past year, I had been discreetly gathering internal data on the company. Robert, in his infinite arrogance, had often asked me to look over financial reports, seeking my praise for his supposed business genius. I had saved every one of them. I knew their suppliers, their clients, their debt structure, and their operational weak points better than he did. Now it was time to use that information. Sterling's biggest weakness was its reliance on a single, primary supplier for a critical raw material. Let's call them Apex Materials. Robert had a long-standing relationship with Apex's owner, but it was a relationship built on golf games and expensive lunches, not sound business practices. I knew from my research that Apex was being squeezed by rising costs and was looking for new, more reliable partners. I leveraged my own network. I arranged a meeting with the CEO of Apex. I didn't mention Sterling Industries. Instead, I presented him with a deal on behalf of a different company in my portfolio. I offered him a long-term contract with a 10% price increase over what Sterling was paying, guaranteed order volumes for 3 years, and payment terms that were twice as favorable. It was an offer he couldn't refuse. He signed the contract, giving Sterling the standard 60-day notice that their supply agreement was being terminated. Robert wouldn't know it yet, but the heart of his company had just been ripped out. The second pillar of Sterling was their largest client, a national retail chain that accounted for nearly 40% of their annual revenue. I knew from the reports Robert had shown me that Sterling was frequently late on deliveries and that their quality control had been slipping for years. The client was unhappy, but they stayed because finding a new manufacturer was a hassle. I decided to make it less of a hassle for them. I put together an anonymous but very detailed dossier. It contained Sterling's late delivery statistics, data on their rising product defect rates, and a financial analysis showing their precarious cash flow situation. I sent this package via a secure courier to the head of procurement at the retail chain. I also included a list of 3 alternative, more reliable manufacturers, all companies I had a small silent stake in. I wasn't just sinking Sterling's ship, I was redirecting their lifeboats to my own ports. While these pieces were moving on the corporate chessboard, I handled my personal life. I found a new, larger condo and signed the lease. I scheduled movers for a date 3 weeks after the game night, a day when I knew Jenna and Madison were scheduled to attend an all-day influencer brunch. The final piece of the puzzle was our upcoming wedding. We were just 4 months away. Deposits had been paid, venues booked, a caterer selected. The biggest expense was the venue, a historic hotel ballroom that cost a fortune. I had put down the $50,000 non-refundable deposit from a joint account we had opened for wedding expenses. I called the hotel's event coordinator. I told her that due to unforeseen circumstances, we had to cancel the wedding. She was sympathetic, but reminded me that the deposit was non-refundable. I understand completely, I told her. But I don't want to cancel the booking. I want to change the nature of the event. I told her to convert the booking from a wedding reception to a corporate awards gala for one of my companies. The date would remain the same. The budget would remain the same. The name on the contract, which was mine, would remain the same. Instead of the Jenna and Alex wedding, the event was now the Vanguard Capital Annual Achievement Gala. With all the traps set, I just had to wait. Jenna remained blissfully unaware. She was more concerned with picking out flower arrangements and arguing with Madison about what color the bridesmaids' dresses should be. One evening, she came home with a stack of wedding magazines. She tossed them on the coffee table and sighed. "It's all so much work," she said. "Sometimes I think you don't appreciate the effort I'm putting into planning our future." I just looked at her and nodded. "I'm sure it's very stressful," I said. The beautiful, oblivious architect of her own destruction. The pieces were all in place. The system was primed for collapse. Update 2. The first sign of trouble in paradise reached Robert about 10 days after my meeting with Apex Materials. I know this because Jenna came home one evening in a state of high anxiety. Apparently, her father had called her in a rage. Apex had sent the official termination letter. Robert, according to Jenna, was losing his mind. He couldn't understand why his old friend would betray him. He was blaming the economy, the government, everything but his own incompetence. "Dad is so stressed," Jenna said, pacing back and forth in the living room. "He said this could be a huge problem for the company. You work in finance. Can you believe this? After 30 years of loyalty." I made some sympathetic noises and told her that business was tough. Inside, I felt the cold satisfaction of a plan unfolding perfectly. Losing Apex meant Sterling's production would grind to a halt in 60 days unless they found a new supplier, which would be nearly impossible at a competitive price on such short notice. A week later, the second bomb dropped. Their biggest client sent a letter, placing their massive account under formal review, due to persistent concerns about supply chain reliability and quality control. The letter cited specific data points that I knew came directly from the dossier I had sent. This time, the panic was real. Robert called a family emergency meeting, and he insisted I be there. I think he genuinely believed my big-shot investor brain could magically fix the problems he had created over decades of mismanagement. The atmosphere at their house was funereal. Robert looked 10 years older. Jenna and her mother were hovering around him, wringing their hands. Robert laid out the situation, his voice shaking with a mixture of anger and fear. "It's a coordinated attack," he declared. "Someone is trying to destroy me." He looked at me, his eyes pleading. "Alex, you understand this world. What do I do?" This was the moment I had been waiting for. I put on my professional face, the one I use in boardrooms. "Robert," I said calmly, "from what you've shown me, the company is facing a catastrophic failure of its core operational pillars. You've lost your primary supplier, and you're about to lose your primary client. Your cash flow is already negative. Frankly, the situation is critical." I spent the next hour walking him through his options, all of which were terrible. He could try to find a new supplier, but it would cost a fortune and take months. He could try to appease the client, but he had no leverage. He needed a massive infusion of capital to modernize his equipment and fix his logistics, but no bank would give him a loan in his current state. Then I laid my own trap. "There is one other option," I said, letting the words hang in the air. "You could seek a private investor, someone who could provide the capital and expertise to turn things around. It would mean giving up a controlling interest in the company, but it would be better than bankruptcy." A flicker of hope appeared in Robert's eyes. "Do you know someone?" he asked. "I might," I said. "Let me make some calls." Of course, the investor I had in mind was me. Not directly, but through a shell corporation I controlled. My plan was never just to destroy them, it was to pick up the pieces for pennies on the dollar. While the business drama was unfolding, my personal exit plan was proceeding on schedule. The Saturday of the influencer brunch arrived. Jenna and Madison left early in the morning, dressed in absurdly expensive outfits, chattering about mimosas and networking. The moment they were gone, my movers arrived. The process was clinical. In 4 hours, every single thing I owned was packed and loaded. I left Jenna's possessions untouched, exactly as they were. But the absence of my things created a stark, hollow feeling in the condo. I left my keys, along with a printed copy of our prenup and a cashier's check for half the value of our shared wedding account on the kitchen island. I also left a 1-page letter. "Jenna, our engagement is over. As you can see, I have moved out. Per our prenuptial agreement, our individual assets remain separate. The enclosed check represents your half of the wedding fund. All other deposits and bookings were made in my name and are now my sole property. Any further communication should be directed to my lawyer. His information is below. Alex." I took one last look around, then left. I drove to my new condo and began unpacking. That evening, I got a string of furious texts from Jenna. She and Madison had come home to a half-empty apartment. She called me a monster, a coward, a thief. She accused me of abandoning her. Madison sent her own series of unhinged messages, threatening to expose me on social media. I read them, took screenshots for my lawyer, and then blocked them both permanently. The silence was golden. The next day, Robert called me, his voice a low growl. "What is this I hear about you leaving my daughter? You can't do this. We have a wedding to plan, and I need your help with the business." "Robert, the engagement is over," I said, my voice cold and final. "And as for the business, my offer to find an investor still stands, but it will be a purely professional arrangement. The price for saving your company will be a 51% ownership stake transferred to the investment group I represent. That is the only offer on the table. You have 48 hours to decide before the offer is withdrawn." I could hear him choking on his own rage on the other end of the line. He had no choice. It was either give up control or watch his father's legacy crumble into dust. The checkmate was in sight. Final update. It has been 3 months since I put my plan into motion. The aftermath was every bit as devastating for them as I designed it to be. Robert, backed into a corner with no other options, accepted my offer. He signed over 51% of Sterling Industries to a holding company, never knowing he was handing the keys to his kingdom directly to me. The day the deal closed, I walked into the Sterling Industries boardroom, introduced myself as the new majority owner, and fired him. I also fired his entire crony management team. The look on his face, a mixture of pure shock and dawning, horrified comprehension, was worth more than any amount of money. I immediately began implementing the turnaround plan I had designed years ago. We renegotiated a new temporary supply deal with Apex, ironically, at a much higher cost to the company, which I was happy to pay in the short term. I personally flew out to meet with the leadership of their big retail client. I showed them my comprehensive plan to fix the quality control and logistics issues, and I offered them a discount for 6 months as a show of good faith. They agreed to keep their account. The company, under my control, was saved. In a year, I expect it to be twice as profitable. In 2 years, I'll sell it for a 9-figure sum. The fallout in their personal lives was just as complete. Without my financial support, Jenna's world collapsed. She couldn't afford the rent on our old condo and was forced to move back in with her parents. Her father, stripped of his title and his company, had a complete breakdown. The big family house is now on the market to cover their massive debts. Jenna's social life imploded. Madison and her other friends were not interested in hanging out with someone who couldn't afford brunch. Their friendship was transactional, and the transaction was over. Madison tried to run a smear campaign against me online, but my lawyer sent her a cease and desist letter so aggressive that she deleted her entire account in a panic. About a month after I left, I started getting the calls. First from Jenna's mother, pleading with me to be reasonable, to take Robert back, to talk to Jenna. Then from Jenna herself, leaving long, tearful voicemails. She was sorry. She made a terrible mistake. She loved me. It was all just a joke. She didn't mean it. The usual script. They finally convinced a family friend to reach out to me, asking if I would just talk to her again. I agreed to one final meeting. We met at a neutral coffee shop. Jenna and Robert were there. They looked awful, defeated. Robert spoke first. He apologized. He said he was wrong, that he had misjudged me. He begged me to give him some kind of rollback at the company, even just as a consultant. Then Jenna spoke. She cried. She said she was lost without me. She asked if there was any chance we could start over. She said she would do anything. I let them finish. Then I took a sip of my coffee and looked them both in the eye. "You seem to be under a misapprehension," I said. "You think this was about my feelings being hurt. You think this is something an apology can fix. It's not." I turned to Robert. "This was a business transaction. I saw a failing asset, and I planned to acquire it. Your disrespect simply proved you were an unreliable partner, so I switched from a friendly merger to a hostile takeover. You didn't lose your company because I was angry. You lost it because you were a bad CEO." Then I turned to Jenna. "And you? You weren't my fiancée. You were my cost of acquisition. You were the price I was willing to pay to get access to the real prize. But your comment at that game night revealed a fundamental flaw in the asset. You had no value as a partner. You were a bad investment. So I cut my losses." I stood up from the table. The color had completely drained from their faces. They were staring at me as if I were a complete stranger, and in a way, I was. They had never actually seen me before, only the role I was playing. "I hope you both learn from this," I said, leaving a $20 bill on the table for the coffee. "Always know the true value of your assets, and never, ever underestimate your competition." I walked out and never looked back. The last I heard, Robert and his wife were moving into a small rental, and Jenna had gotten some low-level office job. They lost everything: their company, their house, their social standing.